what's going on and how it's happening. So you're describing first the cause and then the effect. And it's a process by which one change, changing like one variable, will influence a change in another variable. So as an example, the inflation rate is going to increase when the money supply increases. This is positive analysis, just explaining that the money supply increasing is going to have a certain effect on the inflation rate. We're not making any sort of judgments whether it's good or bad, just basically describing the process. Now, normative analysis is making value judgments. So that's when we're saying what ought to be, what we think the results should be, what we think is best for whether it's society, for individuals, what have you. So we're using analysis to decide whether the outcome is preferable to other outcomes. So for example, using our inflation rate. Is a higher inflation rate going to be good for US consumers? That's a question that we can answer, that we can use like good analysis to answer, but we can all have different answers to that. Some people would say a higher rate is good, some people say a lower rate is good. Is that all done? Oh. And then, did someone show up after? Started passing that around? Okay. If you didn't get a chance, just come up at the end of class. Figure it out. Okay, so then there's the idea of the devil-angel test that shows both of these positive and normative analysis in action. So this was this dates back to David Hume and Adam Smith, so like 250 years. Hume and Smith had different opinions on the role of religion and what role it should have in society. Adam Smith saying it should have a major role in society, I don't know, shaping people's belief systems. Hume saying that it should have a very limited effect on society. At that time, they were discussing whether or not the Church of England should be paid not from like collections that they take at services, but whether like the English government should pay them. Smith and Hume both agreed that if you had the government pay the priests, that you would get, the services wouldn't be as good. They wouldn't be as entertaining, you'd get worse sermons, because they're not competing with other local parishes and other churches to try to get people to show up to their masses. What they're going to get is, people that are guaranteed be paid no matter how much people like it. So they agreed on the positive analysis on this. Smith, who thought religion was a good thing, said that this idea of this payment system would be bad. Hume, who didn't like how much influence religion had, thought the opposite. He thought this would be a good thing. So out of this grew what's called the devil-angel test, where you're doing good positive analysis if you've got the devil and you've got an angel. And they agree to the positive analysis, how it's going to work out. But obviously they want different things. One wants a good thing, one wants an evil thing. Now let's somewhat take it to extreme, talking about good and evil. There's oftentimes economists who are more left-leaning, economists who are more right-leaning, will agree completely on the positive analysis of some policy. But then because they have different normative judgments about what's good for society, one would say this thing is good, the other would say it's bad. But if you can agree on the positive analysis with someone who disagrees with you, then you're doing good analysis. You guys have any questions about the devil-angel test or about these two types of analysis? Like I said, in this class we'll mostly be focusing on how to do the positive analysis, on just understanding what's happening and the method by which you get cause and effect. Now I included James Buchanan's What Should Economists Do on Blackboard. You don't have to read it, you can if you want. He basically talks about how there's two paradigms to study with economics. The main argument is that there is the allocation paradigm, and the exchange paradigm. And these are the two ways that economists currently look at the world and how we study. So allocation, that's just the focus on the allocation of resources that leads to equilibrium. So you're trying to figure out, as an economist, what is the equilibrium? What's going to maximize the welfare in all of society? And then just trying to get there. So in this situation, all gains from trades are exhausted, so no one in society can be made better off without making someone else worse off. But the problem that Buchanan points out is that there's nothing left to study. So this assumes far too much for what's going on in the real world, because that's not how the real world operates. There's constantly new knowledge being discovered, new products being created, prices changing because of new resources or resources being used too much, that this doesn't capture what's really happening. So basically, economics becomes an exercise in maximizing curves, and you can have engineers or a computer do all this. I used to show a picture of a funny picture of my friend, who's an engineer, but it never really got any laughs. So, yeah, like I mentioned, the world is full of constant discovery, and there's advancements that bring us out of equilibrium. So instead of equilibrium being a goal that we reach and then the market just stays there, it's constantly moving out of equilibrium. And the allocative paradigm is too simple to try to understand this. So what we should focus on is economics as exchange, as individuals and firms, consumers and sellers coming together, buying from each other, trying to learn more about what they want, how to make goods, all that good stuff. So we focus on individual actions and the process of learning. And it's through this learning that individuals coordinate their many plans, wants, and goals. They start out not knowing much, so we're full of uncertainty and there's a real lack of knowledge. You don't know if that product you buy is going to be good or not before you buy it for the first time. You don't know if it's going to meet your needs, but you try to know something about the product, whether you just read the description online or if you talk to like a sales associate or a friend who happened to purchase it. So you have some knowledge, but you don't have complete knowledge. And it's through the process of buying these goods and services that we find out whether they're good or not, whether they meet our needs, or whether we need to look elsewhere in the future. So economics is about the context within which imperfect people, so people that lack full knowledge of what they're doing, how they act and interact with each other. When we study this, instead of just trying to determine, what's equilibrium, how to maximize society welfare, we can study some real interesting things. And we can learn a lot more about the real world than what you do just looking at allocation. Literally, you can just take a math class if you want to do optimization problems. So now let's look at competition. So I mentioned how people lack knowledge, firms lack knowledge. So competition is a discovery process. So don't think of this as like a football game, like a zero-sum game where there's going to be a winner and a loser. Competition generates knowledge, and it's how firms and how individuals, how they gain knowledge, how they overcome their starting ignorance. So initially, people don't know, we don't know what goods people want, how to make them, how to price them, what charity are going to satisfy needs, all these things. So we go through a process. Say there's an entrepreneur who has an idea for a new product. They think this is going to meet consumer needs. No one's figured out to produce this yet. For whatever reason, maybe it's too difficult to do. Maybe no one just had the idea. Maybe this is a new want that the entrepreneur discovered. So what do? They go out, they try to sell it. They try to get invested, like investors put money in so they can actually produce it. They go out actually sell in the store, make their own store. If consumers want it, then they keep producing. Consumers keep buying it, and they're going to make enough money, and that's a signal to them that this is actually meeting consumer needs like they thought it would. They keep producing. Now, if they don't, if consumers don't want to buy it, it turns out they were wrong, then the entrepreneur can stop producing it and use those resources to make something else, something that people actually want. So it's through this process that firms discover what's going to succeed and what consumers actually want. They may think they know ahead of time, but they don't know for sure beforehand what's going to succeed and what consumers actually want. So it's actually a process through them offering the product and through consumers buying it or not buying it that they discover whether or not this truly does meet a consumer need. Now, not just what goods to produce are discovered through competition, but also how to produce goods that are discovered through competition. So there's a lot of trial and error going on through techniques and materials. Henry Ford didn't know the assembly line was going to work before he started using it in his Ford car. Turns out it was much better than all the previous production techniques. So they were able to produce a much lower priced car and produce a lot more of them. Now, when one entrepreneur succeeds, others have to adopt their strategy to keep up. So other automakers in that time copied his assembly line. So they were able to make cheaper cars. If not, they'd have been forced out of the market because the cars were too expensive and weren't any better than Ford's. So what ends up happening is the market moves in the direction of the most efficient production methods. So if you've got, let's say, a college that's, or say all the colleges are spending too much money on administrators that don't do anything with the students. Just, it's bloated and expensive. One college comes along and says, okay, we're going to fire a bunch of them because they're not providing anything. We'll be able to offer lower tuition for the same basic college experience. If this is what students actually want, they'll get a lot more students, obviously because it's the lower price tag and the same exact outcome. If other colleges want to succeed and want to continue to exist, what they're going to have to do is do the same thing as that successful university and cut, in this case, the useless administrators. As is something the book wanted to include, I think it's important to go over the types of economies. First is a centrally planned economy. This is an economy where the government decides how all the resources are going to be allocated. They determine, usually like a central planning board, determines what's going to be produced, how it's going to be produced, where it's going to be produced, and then who gets it, or how many of each product people get. The best example of this is the Soviet Union. Obviously don't exist anymore. I would say Cuba, but Cuba is a little weird for to be perfectly centrally planned. Next is the market economy, an economy in which all the decisions of households and firms interacting in the market are how we allocate resources. So if firms earn a profit, they're going to produce more. If they earn a loss, they're going to change production or they're going to go out of business. Where you just use the market in order to determine what should be produced, how it should be produced, who's going to buy it, all that fun stuff. And finally, mixed economy. So in a mixed economy, most economic decisions are from interactions of buyers and sellers, so going through the marketplace. But the government does play a significant role in the allocation of resources. So they might run some industries that, that in that society they believe the market can't handle well enough. They may have regulation that shapes different production methods in certain industries. For instance, if there's a lot of pollution being caused by certain industries, they may tell them, like, you have to produce a certain way, you can't use these things because too much pollution results from it. Not a lot of good examples of market economies and pure market economies in today's world. Mostly we end up with mixed economies. People believe that there's some role for government and at least some industries to stop things like pollution, or sometimes there's natural monopoly. So in like a city, you can only really have like one electricity provider. So local governments often either contract it out or themselves run electricity provider. So market economies tend to be more efficient than centrally planned economies because market economies promote both productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. So productive efficiency is producing goods and services at the lowest possible cost. Because firms need to make a profit, they have a hard budget constraint that, like, if you don't take in more money than you spend, you won't be able to operate for very long. So because of that, firms are encouraged to bring their prices, the price of production, down as low as possible. Market economies also promote allocative efficiency. So that's where production is done in accordance with consumer preferences. Because it's the consumers paying for these goods, firms have to provide consumers what they want. The products they want, the quality they want, at a price they want. So, as we'll talk about later when we talk about firm production, the last unit of a good a firm produces is going to be equal to the marginal cost of producing. So they'll produce right up until, like, that last unit they're breaking even, and they'll stop production. Because after that, consumers aren't getting enough of a benefit for the cost they would have to pay for the cost of producing. So productive efficiency comes out because of competition, because of firms that need to compete for each other for resources and for consumers to actually buy their products. And then allocative efficiency, that arises due to voluntary exchange. Because people can, it's up to them to determine if they want to buy something or not, and if they don't want to buy it, they can just walk away. Firms have to attract consumers somehow. So they have to convince them that this product they're selling them is good enough. So in voluntary exchange, both the buyer and the seller of product are made better off from that transaction. And transactions are going to continue until no more improvement can take place. So the buyer and the seller are not able to make each other better off. Then they're going to stop. All right. That's the end of the first section. Do you guys have any questions about what we've gone over so far? So now let's return to subjective value. Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. This was considered the first book in economics, or at least modern economics. A lot of what Adam Smith wrote about, especially the market process itself, and he called it the invisible hand, where people acting in their own self-interest act as if they're acting in society's best interest. Yeah, like I said, a lot of his ideas are still used today, but not all of them were correct. A big one was he believed in the labor theory of value. Karl Marx later built his theory of communism on the labor theory of value. The idea of the labor theory of value is that the value of a good is absolute. It's a certain number that's out there. They believed it was the sum of the cost of production. So this leads to the idea of exploitation and the idea of price gouging, because the value of a good is what it costs to produce it. So if you're selling for more than that, something has to be going on. Now, if you believe in subjective value, that goods and services are worth whatever the individuals in the trade believe they're worth, then you don't have this exploitation and price gouging. An example of subjective value is the plastic folding tables. So I'm sure most of you guys don't value those white plastic folding tables very much, but the people in Buffalo value them very highly. Was that this class I was talking about, how Jacksonville Bandits and the black market started? Yeah. So people in Buffalo, they're willing to spend a lot for these tables because they break them every single week at their tailgates. For most of us, we don't really care about it. It doesn't meet a certain need, where it meets that very niche need the Buffalo fans have. This idea of subjective value came about in the 1870s during what they called the marginal revolution. That's the first time economists began thinking of goods on the margin, so thinking of the next unit of a good, instead of comparing all of the good. The diamond water paradox I mentioned last Friday, Smith couldn't solve that using his analysis because of the labor theory of value. He thought that was a mystery. But because subjective value, The value of the good or service is determined by each individual being involved in that transaction. So each individual assesses whether or not they want the good, and then how much they'd be willing to pay for it. And again, this is not just money when they're thinking about how much you're willing to pay for it, but it's also opportunity cost. So what other things are they giving up? So now subjective value is dependent on individual needs. So how much value they think they're going to receive from a good. And this can change over time based off of people's changing needs. So you're not willing to spend a lot of money to put water in a squirt gun, but if it's the morning after a big holiday weekend where you're like having fun with your friends and partying, that water is going to be very valuable to you and dealing with your hangover. And it's subjective value that allows mutually beneficial exchange to occur. If both parties couldn't be made better off by an exchange, I don't know, I mean, that's the definition of mutually beneficial exchange. But if there was not subjective value, if parties couldn't value the two parts of the transaction differently, then we wouldn't be able to have mutually beneficial exchange. Either one side would rip the other side off, or they'd be perfectly equal. So if you believe in labor theory value, you sold the good for the cost of production, then both parties would remain exactly the same. They wouldn't be made better off, even though they're both happier to have, one party's happier to have the money, the other party's happier to have the good. All right. So we'll look at the role of prices in an economy. So prices serve an important function. It's not just something annoying that you have to do in order to get a good. It's not just an obstacle in the way. And they're not randomly chosen. They reflect certain realities within the market. So you guys, why is the price of beachfront homes, why are they high? What's that?
People value the real estate.
They value the real estate. Why do they value the real estate? Yeah, who doesn't love the beach? So what does the price do? It reflects to us that, hey, a lot of people want these beach homes. They want property right on the beach because they enjoy it. And also it conserves the number of homes. So only people that value it the most highly are going to be able to afford it. So prices have two roles. The first is that they're a signal. They aggregate and transmit knowledge in an economy. So every good or resource has alternate uses. So prices show how much something is worth to all the market participants. So if it's worth a lot to someone, they're going to be willing to bid up the price. And that signals to others that that person really values that good or that resource. So then other people will either use less of that resource or that good, or they'll use other inputs, use other goods. So far, it's the most efficient way to conserve resources for the people who value them the most. Maybe in the future, with big data, with all the data we're gathering, and with all the computing power we have, we may be able to figure this out in the future without using the market, literally just using the big data. Some economists and data scientists believe this will happen in the future, but for now, the price system is the best way we can do it. And like we talked about tacit knowledge before, knowledge is spread out in an economy, and no one knows all the information out there, or even all the relevant information out there. But through people buying and selling, and through the price changes that result from that, we can, it aggregates that knowledge. So you may not know why in particular that the price of good is increasing, but you do know that it's becoming more scarce. So then you're going to act as if you know what's going on. So you're going to buy less of it, or you may not buy it at all because the price is now higher. So if we think of oil prices, gas has been pretty cheap during COVID because people have been driving less, but before that, when it was like $4 a gallon, that higher price encouraged people to use less gas. People were driving shorter distances less often. Maybe they were carpooling because it was now relatively more expensive to use gas. Now, people didn't necessarily know why the price of gas was increasing. Could have been a refinery that just like broke down. Could be less oil being produced. Oil's kind of controlled by OPEC, like a cartel, and maybe they decided to decrease production, increase the prices. We didn't have to know why the prices were increasing. All that matters is that the price was increasing, so that we then use less of it. Okay. Sorry, I went through this whole slide without going to. Okay, so now why isn't like this desk right here made from gold? Can someone explain to me that?
We're broke.
What?
The school's broke.
Oh, the school's broke. But it's not worth it to build a desk out of gold. It has much more valuable uses. On the one hand for jewelry, on the other hand for like, it's used in like microchips and stuff. Those two are far more valuable than just building a random desk in a classroom out of gold. So we use the price system to determine whether the resources going into it had better uses. And obviously gold has better uses. Another example of this is land. Land has a ton of different uses. Let's say, for instance, there's a sparkling old ski lodge. And its glory days are back in the 80s, but it needs a lot of repairs and it doesn't really make much money. People aren't into that anymore. So if a rich fat cat buys it, closes it down, and fracks the mountain because the resources are more valuable, this is a good thing. It's providing more value for the economy. By fracking it for natural gas, that proves to be more valuable. Why? Because the place that's making very little money was willing to sell to him for that, even though it's completely changing the use of that land, using it for natural resources instead of for a service, for a fun vacation. You saying something?
Good episode.
That was a great episode. Have you seen some of the movies it was based on?
Yeah.
I didn't see Hot Dog the movie until like last fall. It was one of those corny 80s steam movies. So there's a vast amount of knowledge that's required to know the value of all the alternative uses of a resource. And it's near infinite just for one resource. Plus, you don't know the sum of all the individual preferences of like people in the economy, of the consumers that could buy stuff. So this is a vast amount of knowledge to know. I mean, even just for one resource, let alone for all the resources out there. So what happens is prices aggregate this knowledge and they signal the value of the relative uses. So you may not know specifically what the value, all the other uses of one particular resource are, but based on the price, you know if yours is, your use for it is more valuable than other ones. Not other ones in particular, but you know if you're willing to pay, say, $5 for a resource, like, I don't know, per pound, and it only costs $4.50 per pound, you know it's going to be worth it for you, that your use is better than alternative uses. So people can easily see a price change because of a change in the relative scarcity of a resource. The price of a good is, or a resource, very easy to find. But you can't always see, or easily see, why that price change occurred. That would require asking a hell of a lot of people. Also require following just about everything on the news. So we don't know why prices change. So let's say, for instance, the price of milk increases. Was it because there was a decrease in the supply of milk? There's less milk on the market, so it's now more rare. Was it because of an increase in demand? Are people now drinking more milk than before? Are they they brought back the Got Milk campaign and now everyone's drinking milk again? Was it because people want to eat more cheese, so they're using more dairy products to make cheese instead of using it for milk? So not even, the US government can aggregate all this information to determine why the prices are changing. But we can very easily see that prices are changing. Okay, let's take a break there for a second. And you guys have a question, whether it's about the class or something random, just so we can take a break, because people can only pay attention really for like 12 minutes at a time without having it being broken up. I know a little longer than 12 minutes. But.
Favorite food?
Favorite what?
Food.
My favorite food? Yeah, that's tough. I'd have to go with my grandma's homemade pasta. She makes it from scratch and like fresh.
Any specific type that she makes that you like?
I really like her angel hair, like the super like thin pasta. And then she makes like marinara sauce from scratch. So the market is a coordination of individuals all acting in their own self-interest. So this is human action and interaction, but because it's a market, this is just for commerce. So it's buying and selling goods and services. Now, in the proper institutional setting, self-interest benefits all of society. So basically, people are getting rewarded for doing good for others. Basically, the firm, obviously, they're benefiting because they're getting money for selling you a product, but they're also making you better off because you're getting, that product that you want or that you need. Now, there are certain requirements. Obviously, you can imagine ways in which self-interest causes people to hurt other people. But some of these requirements are property rights and secure property rights that can be enforced. The rule of law, so the government is willing and able to enforce any violations of individuals' rights and property rights. General peace, so not a lot of violence occurring, not a lot of threats of whether it's foreign armies or just kind of gangs or people taking your stuff. An efficient government that doesn't waste a ton of resources doing what they have to do. And a few other things. So an old example of this was Oxford University versus Glasgow University. It's been a while, so I forget which one is which. So I'll just guess. Let's say Oxford University, their professors were paid by the university, whereas Glasgow, they were paid by directly by the students taking their courses. The lectures at Glasgow were a lot better than the ones at Oxford University. Because at Oxford, it didn't matter how many students they had in their class, whether they were a good professor or not, they were getting paid by the school no matter what. Whereas at Glasgow, they had to attract the students to their class. And they had to keep them there by giving good lively lectures, giving them a lot of information, basically meeting their needs. So, in the proper setting at Glasgow University, what we get is the professors acting in their own self-interest, making their students better off. Oxford University, not so much, because it wasn't quite the right setup, and they didn't have the incentives to constantly provide, better, more interesting classes to their students. Now, the market is an example of meta-coordination. So meta-coordination, these are things that aren't done on purpose. A lot of individuals acting in their own self-interest, not making plans with other people, but at the end of the day, it looks like they coordinated together. So one example is the dirt path up to JFK over there. That wasn't originally designed by the university. People were just cutting through there. And individuals over time cutting through there just to cut down the time walking to JFK or through a walking path. Right? It's two walking paths based on where they're coming from. So that's an example of meta-coordination. Another example is language. When languages, 1,000 years ago, were invented, someone didn't sit down and write out all the rules and pass it out and say, here you go, this is what we're going to do from now on. They began communicating with each other over time, creating one word at a time, and slowly building up from there. And eventually, people wrote down rules based on what people had been doing. So this is sort of like bottom up, people acting on their own. At the end of the day, it appears as if they were coordinating these things together and working together the whole time. But they weren't planned ahead of time. So now, like we said, that people's knowledge is imperfect. Prices aren't perfect either. So conditions are constantly changing, and more knowledge is being discovered and is being aggregated. So these imperfections are what attracts entrepreneurs. Because entrepreneurs profit from better meeting consumer needs. They come up with a new product, a new service, a new method of production that can either lower costs or meet consumer needs better. Because people have this propensity to discover unrecognized profit opportunity. Again, because they have that incentive, they can earn a profit if they provide people with the goods and services they need. That's a powerful incentive to draw people to try to discover these new things, these new products, these new production methods, what have you. So they discover a new way to solve these problems. What they do, if they're successful, is they earn profits for themselves. They make themselves a bunch of money, but they also make society better off. This is sort of how self-interest comes into play to encourage people to make society better off. It's as if they wanted to make society better off in the beginning, but at least a big part of it is earning money for themselves. Yeah, so prices aggregate and disperse economic knowledge. They also incentivize people to solve the problems that we face. So they help drive discovery. So a high price may be annoying for us, like that we have to pay for it, but it encourages lower priced goods later on. It encourages entrepreneurs to try to figure out how to offer these same goods at a lower price. And over time, that's what we see happen. So the basic mechanism is that ignorance results in an imperfect world and imperfect prices. These imperfect prices, these prices that are too high relative to what they could be, provide profit opportunities to entrepreneurs. And then the feedback prevents errors from continuing. So if the entrepreneur is wrong, they're going to end up losing money relative to their budget. They're not going to make enough money to cover their costs because consumers aren't going to buy the goods. So in that case, they're going to get a very clear signal that what they're doing isn't working. Likewise, if what they do is working, if it is providing, it is meeting consumer needs, providing them some sort of benefit, then they're going to earn a profit over their cost. So it's going to encourage them to keep producing those goods, and it's going to encourage others to copy them, so they don't fall behind. You guys have any examples of good entrepreneurs? Warren Buffett. What did he do? Yeah, he was a really, I guess still is, good investor. And his innovation was a different way of looking at what stocks or what things to invest, what assets to invest in. Any other examples of entrepreneurs you guys like?
Donald Trump.
He definitely was an entrepreneur. And a good example because not all of his entrepreneurial activities paid off. I think Trump Steaks is like the example people hold up of things that failed. But he owns all those resorts. And I don't know if he gets credit for the Apprentice or if someone else does. Do you know if that was his idea or not?
No idea.
Sorry, what was the one over here?
Like,
Mark Cuban. Yeah, how did he start?
I think he started selling papers like a kid, and then,
Yeah, it was like door to door. He built it up from there.
yeah, I have no idea. But I did a report on it back in the day. See how much that paid off.
Well, you remember just enough, right? Now look at him. He's on Shark Tank, funding tons of other entrepreneurs.
Yeah, you don't even have to play.
Yeah. And he's like the only owner that sits in the stands. instead of like, like the super nice like box they have. We obviously tend to remember the entrepreneurs that are successful, not the ones that are failures. But there's just as much to learn from the failures as there is from the successes. Okay. I included a piece by Don Boudreaux. It was just like a very short, like op-ed style article that's on Canvas. His basic argument is that the economy has tons of unexploited opportunities. There's chances for people to make profits that they currently aren't taking advantage of. That's because we lack the knowledge to know whether those are going to work or not. So the role of the entrepreneur in society is to exploit those opportunities, is to figure out what could be done that isn't being done now that people want, and taking advantage of this, providing those products, those services, what have you. So a lot of typical Econ 101 classes are flawed that they ignore this process. They focus on the allocation paradigm. They just try to maximize, society's utility and call it a day. But really, we can do a lot of cool things, and we can learn a lot just by following how entrepreneurs come up with these ideas, how they find these unexploited opportunities, how they go about producing those goods, and seeing whether they're successful or if they fail. So these unexploited opportunities that Gracie uses is called market failure. A market failure is when the market fails to improve the human condition as much as possible. So society's well-being is lower than it could be in a perfect world. So entrepreneurs improve the function of the market and better meet all humanity's needs by discovering these new opportunities. The market currently is full of all sorts of errors that allow entrepreneurs to improve our lives. So it's kind of ironic. We talked about earlier about how the market economy was the best way to determine how to produce goods and services in a society. It beats centrally planned economies. But at the same time, it's still full of errors. What separates the market economy from a centrally planned economy is that because you need to meet consumer needs, these mistakes, these errors aren't going to persist. Someone can come along and solve them. Do you have a question over here? Okay. I caught out of the corner of my eye, so I wasn't 100% sure. With that, we'll end class for the day. Let me know if you have any questions. My office is kind of moving back over to the library sometimes, and they'll be here like in between my classes. So if you want to get in contact with me, you don't see me over here, just send me an email. We can do it that way.